Welcome to the Bonsai Time podcast, the tree hugger's #1 spot for history, horticulture, and having fun. I'm your host Ryan, and today we hope you will enjoy a short Deadwood deep dive where myself, Rob Hoffman of Yume-En Bonsai, and Will Baddeley of Wildwood Bonsai discuss the nuances created by different Deadwood carving techniques and when Will likes to use different methods, such as manual carving instead of power tools. I hope you'll learn some tricks and remember to use them to bonsai on. Well, we can do a little bonus episode. I'm just not going to stop the recording and we'll cut it into two. So you guys can both discuss this, but what I thought would be good to do while Will is here is kind of go over the main methods for carving Deadwood in bonsai. And a lot of people may be curious about Deadwood carving, but they may not know the diversity of ways that you have to do it. And then what I really wanted to hear from Will is like when you would use one technique versus another. And so like if we just go down the list, today Rob was working on this juniper and he was doing kind of the more hand chiseling and peeling and tearing. And I don't know, are you familiar with the name Si Dao?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the name that I heard of it through. He's like a Taiwanese bonsai artist that works with a lot of junipers. And apparently he has a book about this technique. I have not found the book, but that's what I've heard. Yeah,
he works on some pretty massive junipers. Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely technique with the right type of wood. You know, that green wood works particularly well because it tends to tear off in ribbons. Okay. But also, you know, if the branches or trunks have movement in them, that you can get the twists and turns. If the wood is very straight, then it doesn't tend to work, or dry, it doesn't tend to work so well. But you know, you can use a mixture of the hand tearing techniques and machine carving in one application. There's nothing to stop you enhancing drier wood with machine after you've tried to tear it.
And do those techniques blend together if you had them both on the same tree? Or
okay. Yeah, if you're using the right tools, it can work very well. You can highlight with the flying saucer bit, which is a knife edge burr. You can cut in quite deeply. Sometimes it's awkward to get into angles with little chisels and little picks, you know, and cleaning up with wire brushes and that kind of thing. So there's several applications you can do on one tree.
Gotcha. And
there's no hard and fast rules.
Okay. But are there any hard and fast rules about like what species this method of the peeling and the chiseling would work best with?
I certainly wouldn't apply it to the chiseling side of it. I certainly wouldn't apply it to deciduous trees. With chiseling, deciduous trees don't tear like in the way junipers and pines do. It tends to snap off, and invariably when you run a chisel down into wood, it will crack below where it snaps. So you're opening it up to rot. You know, junipers and pines have high amounts of resin in the wood, so there's a lot of protection there for the future, but you don't get that so much with deciduous work. So I prefer to machine carve deciduous trees. Plus the fact you've got different types of deadwood throughout a tree. It's nice to have a story in a tree. So you'll have old deadwood and young deadwood. Young deadwood will be sharp and jagged, but old deadwood is smooth and soft. And hand tearing or chiseling doesn't give that effect. If you want to make a shari, if you start chiseling it, it looks like something has snapped off, and it doesn't work for me at all. So yeah, machine all the way with deciduous trees. Yeah, I mean, you could do a certain amount of chiseling, but it would have to be uphill. You'd have to be undercutting the wood so the water will flow down and off the tree and not into the tree.
Okay, that's good to know.
I've spent nearly 30 years kind of studying deadwood and working with it. And yeah, chiseling is the wrong way to go with deciduous trees.
I'm kind of curious because I've been working on some boxwoods lately. I've found that the peeling method, like the wood, is similar to junipers in my finding. I don't know if you agree with that.
You might get away with it with very green wood, with some deciduous species, but in general, I would machine carve.
Yeah, so
elm tends to be a bit spongy, and a little bit more tearable. But as I say, you've got to think of how the water is going down into the wood. That's critical. That's absolutely critical, because we want it to last as long as possible. And we have interventions we can use, like wet rot wood hardeners and resins that you can apply to the deciduous wood that will give it longevity. But yeah, it's critical that the water has an escape route, and chiseling and cracking it just opens it up to rotting out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and this juniper I'm looking at, it kind of makes these little cracks so the water may enter there or freeze there during the winter, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So we can talk next. You already mentioned the machine carving. There's the die grinder for a large tree. There's the Dremel for a small tree. Or the old-fashioned way, there's the electric chainsaw for the huge tree, or before those die grinders and Dremels were being used. So I'm curious, you've already mentioned that you prefer to use the power tools, especially on straight pieces of wood and softwood species like deciduous that are subject to decay at a faster rate. I guess one question about this that I had is, do you see any distance or differences between your style of carving and Dan Robinson's style of carving? Because we talked about him today, and Kevin had brought the book. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, everyone that I know that carves a lot has quite a unique style. I think my focus is on detail, really. Detail and a more natural wear. A lowland rot from the base upwards. That's kind of my speciality marks that I put on a tree. Dan's working a lot with high mountain trees, so it's less about lines on the tree and more about form and shape. With him, someone like Martin Olander's, he does a fair bit of carving. It's very sculptural in appearance. And Kevin Wilson, he was my kind of mentor in the early days, and I got a lot of inspiration from him. Is a kind of mixture of sculptural and naturalistic.
I see.
Yeah, and I can generally spot them quite easily. I don't have to see the name at the bottom of the tree to know who carved what. So yeah, they're quite unique styles.
And do you think different styles, might they cater to your style maybe caters to viewing up close because you have those fine details, whereas another style may cater to viewing from across the room because you can see the motion of the branch even if it doesn't go with the grain of the wood, because they may have implemented some carving that went into a long straight branch, kind of like we were doing on my boxwood today. Implemented some carving that made a straight branch into a more curved branch.
Yeah.
So I think you have an illustration here behind Rob. I can put a picture up in the show notes, but so you do some of that where you're kind of eating away the outside to add a curve into a straight branch. But do you think that your own style or your preference is like to do that in a more limited way so that the grain of the wood still can work in the end?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, if it's a straight piece of timber, even though you put movement into it, the grain is still in the same vein. It's still in the same lines. So you're not doing spirals and really truly artistic shapes and crossing the grain. So you're still staying within the true nature of the wood, even though you've put shape into the form. And another thing to think about is the sense of scale as well. If you're working on a much smaller piece of deadwood on a small tree, then your lines need to reflect that. A big tree, it can have larger lines, and so there's lots of things to think about as far as that design element. Does that answer the question?
I think so, yeah. So you're kind of saying in that straight branch, you're more like eating away the underneath layers, but the grain of the wood is still going in the same direction.
Yeah.
So in that case, your lines are still kind of going straight up and down.
Yeah, I don't stick. You can deviate slightly from the grain line. You can come across slightly, but I try and keep as true as possible.
Okay.
Because once the wood starts cracking vertically and across the grain, it can compromise the work. So I think you have to be as true as you can to the nature of the wood.
Got it. That'll be something good for everybody to think about.
Yeah.
The Bonsai Time podcast will be right back. This episode of the Bonsai Time podcast is sponsored by me, In Vivo Bonsai. What I began 8 years ago as a blog just providing information from my bonsai apprenticeship has evolved into a full-fledged bonsai nursery. In addition to seeds and trees, In Vivo Bonsai now also carries bonsai soil, books, tools, wires, and pots. Come find me vending at the Cincinnati Bonsai Show this weekend, October 5th through 6th, 2024, or check invivobonsai.com for upcoming events, expanding online offerings, and to make an appointment to visit my nursery in Columbus, Ohio, USA. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, so we talked about the Sidao peeling method and the power tool carving. And do you think that the chiseling, is that in the same vein as the peeling method? Or
it's just a quick way of opening up. You start with the chisel, and then you can use pliers to pull strands down. I call it a chiseling method because it's self-explanatory, really. But it is that tearing technique.
Gotcha. So they do all kind of like work together.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then I guess the last category that I can think of, maybe you guys have other ideas, there also is the option of doing a flat cut and healing the wound and not showing the deadwood. Yeah. Is that something that you ever do, even though you're famous?
Yes.
A famous deadwood carver?
In fact, we discussed it today on a small olive that had a couple of little sacrifice branches that the guy suggested we carve, and I said no, it's just easier just to sand them down and let them heal over, because there were lots of branches around the wound, so it will heal over quite quickly, and they weren't significant branches anyway. So it's I certainly don't suggest carving every tree that comes into the workshop either. If it doesn't need it, then why do it? It's not necessary for every tree.
Yeah, that could be true.
What were you saying about how many trees you got carved in your garden?
It's about 4 or 5 trees out of, what do I have? 50 or 60, I suppose I have.
That's less than I expected.
Yeah.
Dan is on the other side. He says every tree deserves deadwood.
I do agree with that. Certainly dead branches, but carving big sharis up a trunk or making huge deadwood areas it can be unnecessary.
Yeah.
And you've also got to think, you know, if you've got say a deciduous tree, don't make too much. Try and imagine the tree without the deadwood. If it doesn't make a tree anymore, then maybe you shouldn't be doing so much deadwood on the tree, because at the end of the day, there's going to come a point where that deadwood falls off.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Because all deadwood is transitional, whether it be juniper or deciduous. You know, it doesn't last forever and ever. You know, it might last longer with junipers and pines, but eventually it goes. You know.
So circling back to the idea of healing over cuts, you said if it's a small cut, you may be partial to doing that. If it's likely to heal in a quick, useful time frame, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the species element. Some trees are fast to callus, some hardly ever callus at all. So obviously, if that's the case, you're not going to heal it over. So you've got to think about that element of it as well.
Can you imagine a scenario where like the gin is coming out at an unattractive point and you would say, no matter the species, just better to let that heal eventually?
Yeah, or shorten it. You know, there's many options. You could reduce it, hollow it. There's all sorts of ways you can deal with elements in trees. Yeah, if it's coming straight towards you or something like that, you might want to reduce it, or possibly carve it so that it just goes off to the side slightly, if possible.
So I guess two other things that we can talk about briefly.
Excuse me.
Is how, kind of like methods of wood preservation. You mentioned there's the penetrating epoxy. It can be useful to save a piece of deadwood once it's starting to go a little soft.
Yeah.
The other one that we haven't talked about is lime sulfur, and I know a lot of people out there are familiar with it. I'm curious if you have any opinions on what trees it may be suitable to use on, or like how often people should apply it.
Yeah, I'm not very keen on the stark white deadwood that you often see in larger shows. I prefer to. I never put it on neat. I will water it down by 50%. You get a more silvery white. But plus, treat your trees, if you're going to put them in a show, treat them well before the show, not a couple of days, maybe 6 months. So you just get a little bit more patina on the wood and a little bit of fading, a bit more silvering than that stark white finish. Even on, you know, it's a nice contrast to see the difference between the deadwood and the trunk. But you know, so much contrast is a little bit plasticky, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you've kind of mentioned during Rob's interview that you are a little more naturalistic. So do you use that lime sulfur on your deciduous trees as well?
Never on deciduous trees.
Okay.
I don't. There's a bit of a trend to colour the inside of deciduous wood with like dark inks as well. I don't do any of that. If you want a change in colour, if you want shadow, then carve deeply. You know, if you shallow carve and paint it black, it looks good in a photograph, but once you get up close and have a look at it, you can see the back of the hole.
Yeah.
And and it looks like it's burnt out as well. Yeah, the black on the inside of a trunk, you wouldn't see that in nature. So let the outside of the wood will bleach naturally. Even with the epoxies that you put on, they'll return to their natural colour.
Okay.
But it will silver off in the sun. But obviously internally it will stay slightly darker and more moist, and you know, so it's kind of a different colour. So if you carve for depth, then you'll get that appearance of it being darker on the inside and lighter on the outside.
Okay. I think that's all the questions that I have on the topic of deadwood for today. Do you have any questions, Rob? Any? I mean, you can always ask Will at dinner, but
No, I am good.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you both.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. And I have to say this because Kevin's not here, but bonsai on.
Bonsai
Okay.
on.
The Bonsai Time podcast is purely grown and horticulturally crafted by Kevin Ferris, Ryan Houston, and Kelly Louie. To find out more and see pictures about today's interview or sponsors, see the show notes linked in the description. Submit questions, suggestions, or tree pictures for future discussion episodes. Find the contact form on our website, bonsaitimepodcast.com, or message us directly at bonsaitimepodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support future episodes, please rate us, share episodes, donate, or become a sponsor. The music on today's episode was provided by Midi Cancer. To find more of their work, check out their SoundCloud and Bandcamp pages. To stay in touch with us, subscribe to the Bonsai Time podcast on your favorite podcast app, Instagram, or YouTube, and Facebook. Contact us individually. Kevin's Instagram is Kevin_Ferris PNW. Kelly's Instagram is Bonsai with Kelly. Ryan's website is invivobonsai.com, and his Instagram is invivobonsai. Thank you all, and remember, bonsai on!